Good morning, afternoon, to whatever time zone you're in, everyone. Hi. I'm Michael Peter Edson. I have the honor of chairing the Europeana External Advisory Board, a band of brothers and sisters who are giving their time to help kind of provide a provocative discussion partner with the Europeana Foundation, the Aggregators Forum, and the network, and all of our friends and fellows. Let me welcome on stage our panel. Today, just come on up and file on board. No, we won't dwell on formalities here, and I'll introduce everyone as they take their seats. It's amazing to be, there's that Chinese proverb, may you live in interesting times, or is it may you not live in interesting times? We live in very interesting times, and it's one of the great pleasures in life to be involved at the beginning of something. And this data space for culture is truly the beginning of something. And as we've been talking about this conference, and I've been working with you and your colleagues, and we've been discussing this as a panel, the beginnings of things is also filled with a lot of ambiguity, a lot of questions, a lot of danger, and a lot of opportunity and excitement. And rather than keep that excitement of the beginning of things to ourselves, we've decided to open up that conversation to everyone, really, and let you in on it and maybe demonstrate some of what I've seen, the kind of bravery and humility and opinions and debate sometimes that we have when we talk about these big ideas. Who is this for? What do they want? What do we hope to create in society as a result of this investment, this likely 10 years we'll spend together in this data space as the world changes underneath and around us? So the setup today is we have 4 external video provocations coming from luminaries, some of whom are in this room. Hi, Caitlin. Thanks for joining us. And we have 6 panels who represent the very best of us together, people you hopefully know and love well. And we're going to play a video provocation, 2 minutes, and then we're going to talk this over for about 15 minutes. We've looked at these before. We've arranged to have a lead respondent, so it's not just a random ad hoc discussion among 6 people on stage. We'll move through the videos, and about halfway through, we'll open up the questions and the debate and the discussion to you in the audience and you on the World Wide Web. And we will wrap up with a tour de table, 1 minute from each panelist with their kind of closing or framing thoughts maybe for the rest of the conference. And it's our hope that we can go deep, a little deep here. We can model the conversations that we expect to hear in the halls through the next few days and through the next few years as we really figure this out together. There's no other way. It's not going to be figured out on a whiteboard in Brussels or in The Hague. It's going to be figured out together. So if we're cool online and we're cool in the house, we are cool. Our illustrious panel. Rehana, you've met earlier the head of unit of interactive technologies, digital culture and education at the European Commission, Marie-Véronique, director of Europeana, Martina Bagnoli, chair of the supervisory board. Thank you for joining us. Also a museum gallery director. Sofie Taes, vice chair, management board of Europeana Network Association. Marie-Véronique Leroi, chair of the Aggregators Forum and a project manager at the French Ministry of Culture. Great to see you, Marie. Esther Huyer, who's a new partner in the Europeana data space family, director of data strategy and data policy with Capgemini. And I'm told that you have maybe a decade or more of experience in OpenGov, but the culture space is new to you, and we love that. We love that so much. It's new to me too in a lot of ways. And I'm Michael Peter Edson. Again, I'm an independent digital cultural strategist with 30-something crazy years in museums and culture. My first job in museums was cleaning plexiglass cases at the Smithsonian. $10 a case, best job I ever had. It's a lot harder than it looks. So with that being said, we're going to dive into these video provocations. The first one coming from Loic Tallon, who's a member of the Europeana Foundation Advisory Board and was Chief Digital Officer at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, is now a consultant. He knows of what he speaks, and we asked Loic, what is it like at the beginning of things?
From 2005 to 2015, I was all in on mobile experiences for cultural institutions. I helped build over a dozen apps. I joined the Met Museum in New York to build their app. Heck, I even wrote a book about it. But towards the end of that 10-year stint, and as my role changed into one more focused on strategy, impact, ROI, I kept coming back to one question. If an app was the answer, what was the question? And my hypothesis was that in 90% of the cases, and still today, we actually deemed teams didn't know what the question was. And if they did know what the question was, they actually really hadn't interrogated if the question was any good, or in fact, if the answer they'd come up with, an app, was the right answer. People had just decided they wanted to build an app. And what I believe was happening, and something I see still happening today, is that the love for the answer, for building an app, had normalized the behavior where people maybe interrogated the questions that they were basing their project on a little less rigorously. In fact, what I saw people who were questioning whether in fact the answer was the right answer, if the question was the right one to go after, were kind of sidelined and told, hey, you're just not seeing the world the same sophisticated way that we are. And this behavior only amplified if a funder had been found who had drunk the same juju juice and was willing to underwrite the whole adventure. Now, of course, that's a bit of a risk side, and maybe I'm pushing too far, but what I also see in this question of if an app is the answer, what is the question, is an opportunity. Because frankly, everything to do with the question happens at the start of the study. It's at the start of the study we decide, is the destination the right destination to go after? How do we know it's the right destination? How do we know what we will find there? Because in fact, it's before the ship leaves the harbor that those questions need to get answered. Because, ultimately, when the ship is sailing, no one really cares how beautiful the ship is, how efficiently it's sailing, how quickly it gets to its destination. If the destination is not the right one, there was no point going there in the first place. So that's how I would frame my two questions to the group today. As we sit thinking about this data space for culture, one is, what can we do to truly interrogate the premises on which this project is built? Who are the voices we should be listening to make sure the question is the right one, and the answer we've created is in fact the right answer, no matter if it's funded or not? And the second part is to flip it a little bit and say, what are the signposts we should look out for that will tell us actually we're heading in the wrong direction? What are those signposts? Let's identify them now, because once the ship starts sailing, it'll see that signpost, but the wind will be in the sails and it'll be like, oh, there was that signpost, but we're funded, we're going.
Has anyone? Yeah. Loic asked me to make sure everyone knew that his children did the set design for that video. Esther, have you ever been on that ship with the wind going behind the sails and the signpost just drifting by?
I think so.
Take a microphone and the floor is yours.
Is it on?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. I have the honor to be the lead on this first question. Great. Easy, right? Fantastic question to remind ourselves that just because we have this idea of where we're going, we should never forget to challenge it, understand why we're doing it, what's important, and how would we notice if we are going the wrong direction indeed. I would like to start with the answer, because if we don't understand the answer, data space, we cannot judge if it's the right one, and then we should look at the questions, I guess. We all know what an app is, and we already understood that most of us don't know what a data space is. So I'm going to give you my best try of understanding it. So I read the technical blueprints and the governance models and the ideas. And I'm not going to quote those to you because I still haven't found a good way of conveying that long message. But here's my way of explaining where we are trying to go to with the data space. Because it's not a concept that came to us just yesterday. You said 15 years ago, it's relatively new. I'd say 15 years ago, it's been there. A good definition comes from a paper 10 years ago. And now we are going there because technology allows and culture allows. What we did before is We exchange data ad hoc, often one-on-one. So you send me an email and say, do you still have this Excel sheet? I'm like, yeah, I think I got it somewhere. I'm going to send it to you. So it's a bit like, forgive the bad analogy, I didn't come up with a better. I make a cake, and you would like to have a piece. So I'll cut a piece, which I think you'll be happy with, not too little, you would be angry with me, not too much, because it's waste. And then I wrap it, and I ask you, when can I come and give it to you? So I come by and give you the piece of cake. And then my cake gets really famous, because it's really good. I cannot bake at all. And then maybe you ask me, you would like to have a piece as well. So I'm going to wrap it, but you would like to have a different wrapping, like more, not Tupperware, but paper. So I go and deliver a piece of cake to you too. And so it gets more complex how we share ad hoc one-on-one. And I cannot keep track on what kind of wrapping did you want. Oh, you had a nut allergy and you don't like eggs, and it gets all very difficult for me. So what are we doing? We say, okay, you know what? I bring my cake and you bring your muffins and you bring a picnic table, and then we all just meet. I label it what I have, nuts, eggs, and you just choose yourself what you'd like to have. That's data intermediary, the table. And that's already a great step forward. Makes it easier because you can just choose the cake or the muffin or the data you like. The challenge here is, what if the person that is supposed to bring the picnic table forgets the table? Then we have a problem. Meaning the data intermediary has a lot of power in this scenario. What if she decides to change the charging for the data or the security principles, or puts the servers all to the US? Then we cannot have cake. So what are we thriving for? And often we are still using the intermediary scenario here. We are thriving towards, and let me bend this analogy a bit, me throwing the right piece of cake right into your mouth. Because we all see each other. And we know what kind of cake you like and you like. And with a data space, we go to the utopia of having data sovereignty and a technical infrastructure that allows us to share data in a compliant way, in a technical and financially feasible way. And in this utopian thought, even in a way where we have a trustless system, because the system and the IT infrastructure doesn't allow us to, for example, use the data in a way that it's not been intended for. So we have a sovereign data ecosystem where we can share data in an aligned way, in aligned standards, where we cannot go wrong, and thus have a more sustainable way, also in terms of less transport costs, because I don't have to drive my cake all the way to the picnic table. And this is a bit where we are heading to with the data space. So that was my best try. So if we wanted to go for that kind of data sharing, a data space is a great answer. What I would like to ask now, are there maybe more questions than a better way of sharing data? What was the initial question that Europeana had?
Oh yeah, that's right. That was the second one.
Yeah. Harry, we'll go to you and then Marie.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that wonderful analogy. Makes me hungry. Yeah, good question. So what question did Europeana originally try to answer, is what you were saying. So this was in 2005, right? This is sort of the myth of creation of Europeana, which I keep entertaining because it's a good story. That was when Google came to Europe with the Google Library project. I don't know if you remember that. But the proposal was, you cultural heritage institutions have a digitization problem, right? You don't know how to do that at scale, and we can do that, so we'll do it for you. And it sounded like a really promising thing to do, until we started realizing, there might be a little danger in, having one single privately owned company, which also happened to be in the United States, decides what cultural heritage looks like in the future. And that was the thing that Europeana tried to answer. How do we make cultural heritage democratically accessible, on our own terms? So that's why I said earlier in my speech, I think the data space, in the way you defined it, holds the promise to do that even more successfully at scale than we've been able to do in the past 15 years. I think that's the best way for me to formulate this. Yeah.
Thanks, Harry. Marie, you have also been thinking about this, this provocation from Loic. I think it should be on.
I might be a bit provocative, but should there be a question at the start of it? Because we used to believe that someone said, if there is a need, there is an app for that. So maybe we were a bit too much listening to that statement. I think the cycle of having a question and then building an application or a website to answer that question is probably over. In a way, because that's the evolution of technology, the way we produce the data, the way we maintain it. And then that's just evolution. So I won't go to the sailing metaphor or the baking one. I'm going to be very basic. I'm sorry for that. But as policymakers, we may have anticipate some of the needs, say, okay, we need to do that because there would be this kind of use for this application or this data production. But then even if we can anticipate like 80 to 90%, there is still like 10 to 20% of unexpected use. And this is why I think a data space is pretty crucial, and it's the natural evolution of how you can make data accessible to the widest audience, because you can then facilitate this 20%, 10 to 20% unexpected use. Because it's just about not saying that, okay, now we are just getting to you all of this that is available, because this is our vision of what cultural heritage should be. Then we are making it available so everyone can take this and fascinate it, shape it the way they want it. In a way, it's like, it's very trending right now. It's the do-it-yourself tendency, you know, so it's almost the same. You are making the data available and people do whatever they want with it. And the thing is that we need to make sure that they do it in an environment that is with trust, that we make sure that the data is reliable, that it has been produced correctly, that it can be reused, that it has been documented, and also it's facilitate the translation, the multilingualism, and so on. And this is why a data space is, I think, the direction. We also need to make sure we have, because in cultural heritage we tend to be working like in silos. Well, we are archives, so the libraries are their own ways, the other galleries may have their other ways. But in a way, we are all in the same boat. And I think the data space also shows that we need to be interoperable with each other within the cultural heritage sector. But also there are the rest of the world there, because as Harry mentioned, there are other data spaces for health, for agriculture, for tourism, and so on. So we need to be interoperable within the cultural heritage sector, but also toward the rest of the world. And this is why also I think it also answers to this challenge of the digital sobriety that we'll be talking later on. But basically, I think this is the direction that we should go. But I don't think it's like one way, you know, it just you publish it once and then it's over. You have to go then and then you go back and then back and forth. And it's like in computing sciences, like the agility. If you are maintaining and producing data, you need to be agile. And I think a data space will have to be agile. So no question, I think, but maybe the data space is the answer in the end.
That's a very provocative answer to a provocation, Marie. And it reminds me of the early days when we first started putting collections online and discovered, the early days of the Flickr Commons, when we discovered the incredible fecundity and creativity of what people would do with culture that, after all, is their culture, once they could finally get their hands on it. But I wonder, in the spirit of Loic's provocation, and in the couple of minutes left in this segment, if we imagine ourselves 5-6 years from now, got code up and running, the servers are humming, the cake is being delivered to who needs it on their own terms, or found, or we find they're taking the cake and doing something completely different with it that we hadn't imagined. What might we see as we're sailing this ship that would make us think, oh, we've made a wrong turn? Or conversely, that we're absolutely headed in the right direction. Maybe first the negative. Any thoughts? What would be a danger sign for you? Martina, please.
Very short. If nobody eats the cake or wants to eat the cake, that would be the wrong direction to go.
What about if only people who look and are educated like us are eating the cake? Would that be okay?
We want the cake to be, we want everybody to want our cake.
Do we want people to sell cake to each other and to us? Is this read right? Or is this just a big cake shop in the sky?
Say that question again.
We can move to another answer. What about the good? Yeah, Sofie.
I wanted to say yes. Who says that missing a signpost is such a bad thing? If we go back to baking the cakes, I believe that the pâte feuilletée, the bladerdeeg, has been invented as a sort of a mistake of something else, a dough that went wrong. Yeah. I'm not really convinced that we should aim at a faultless process. I think trial and error is part of this journey, right? We are setting out on this ship, and in a certain sense, we are being thrown in at the deep end. But it's a good thing. It's forcing us to think on our feet, to look together for solutions for problems that are going to occur along the way. And who knows in which direction, into which beautiful island that might take us.
So let me take a pause on that, because I think this, in our discussions and in our work on the advisory board, this is really one of the fundamental questions about this project. Is it something that has been pre-designed that we are to build? Or is it something that has a general direction, a set of values, which we need to interrogate constantly, but which requires us as a community and a team to adapt to in response to the real world? And I mean, I think it's that second thing, right? I mean, this is the subtext here. It's that second thing. But we need to say and understand that. It's ultimately not up for me to decide. I'm from out of town. I'm going to finish this session and go home. It's up to you to decide this and for us to agree as a community that that's what we want to do. Okay, next provocation is, there's Loic again, from Julia Matamoros, who's a cultural organizer. She joined some of our peer-to-peer sense-making workshops in 2020 during the height of the pandemic. I got to know her then and have been very inspired by her work in Mexico and Canada, working with immigrant communities, and also she'll tell you about indigenous digitization. So here we go, Julia.
I'm very lucky to live and work in between Canada and Mexico and to navigate these two different places with freedom. And in that back and forth, it's become very clear to me that some of the biggest challenges we're facing, like climate change or increasing social inequality, demand that we work together globally, and that inevitably means cross-culturally. So increasingly, ties and relationships among people, not countries or institutions, people, become fundamental to build the kind of cooperation that we really need. So how do we do that? One way to do this is by creating cultural spaces that truly welcome diversity and that foster reciprocity as well. Let me share an example with you from a program in Canada called Indigitization, which stands for Indigenous and Digitization. This program was created in 2012 because Indigenous communities in British Columbia needed and wanted to digitize their cultural heritage, but neither funding systems, nor protocols, nor data spaces had been designed with their needs in mind. So what did they do? They created a program in partnership with the University of British Columbia to build capacity within Indigenous communities and digitize their own heritage. This changed everything because communities reclaimed the authority to set the goals and rules of the data and access systems they were using. For example, they used their own CMS and set their own governance policy in accessible and jargon-free terms. But also, they defined what constitutes cultural heritage for them and how to represent themselves through their culture in this data space. This was both a grassroots and academic initiative from the onset, which centered relationships at the heart of this data space. Clearly, a data space built with these values and goals in mind will be very different from one built exclusively for academic researchers or collection managers. So today, as we speak about networks, I would like to challenge you to think about the communities you intend to serve through the data space for culture. How will you recognize and empower them? Ask yourselves who decides what qualifies as culture in this space and what cultural heritage means in the context of mass migration. I guarantee you will know someone like me with their fitting between cultures. If you can reach out and invite them to be part of your networks, not as passive members, but ready to welcome their contribution, you will build a space with me in mind and already taken important steps towards building the cross-cultural, inclusive spaces we need so urgently. Thank you, and I hope you have an amazing next 3 days.
Thank you, Julia. And Esther, I feel like I can kind of do, the cake metaphors helped me understand a lot about what Julia is saying. Sofie, you've been thinking about this provocation.
Yes, instead of a provocation, it's kind of a dream image for me. This idea of a data space that's becoming ever more and ever more genuinely inclusive and diverse, where lots of more voices are heard, and we act also upon those voices. And what I would really be excited about if we see in the data space many more of the synapses pop up that we already have, and Europeana is already a network of networks, and I'm only looking here to my left to think of the aggregators, what a fabulous bunch that is. Also our network association, over 3,000 professionals from not only cultural heritage, but also these adjacent fields that Harry illustrated earlier as data spaces. I would like to see many more of them pop up in the next couple of years, especially representing communities that up till now have not been given enough voices, have not been given enough of the light in cultural heritage collections. So what I think we need to do, I see an opportunity here to take this data space, to think of it as a house with many rooms. I don't want to use a religious metaphor, but this is my mental image of it. Also, maybe going back to our preparatory phase, where we talked about the data space as a marketplace with a lot of booths, with children's activities, a carousel, a hot dog stand, and so on. This is actually, I think, the momentum for us to create such an exciting playground. I think in a certain sense, okay, we're talking about very serious things, but we're also talking about playing and getting familiar in new ways with our cultural heritage. So voila, I think not only do we need to work on our own networks, I think we need to mine deeper. We need to be even more inclusive. If we see that some communities are not represented, why don't we step out of our bubble and go to them, ask them to join, ask them for their opinions and for their needs. But it goes also the other way around. We are open to be approached by new communities that perhaps are wondering what this whole Europeana thing is about. I think come take a taste on one of our booths. Surely we have some cakes and other good stuff. So I see a mutual and a reciprocal opening in the data space for becoming a more diversified heritage community.
Oh, beautifully said. And as I listen to you speaking, and I think about Julia and Loic's provocation, it's those types of events, communities popping up, people like Julia, that I see as those mileposts, those signposts that are going by the ship. Not technical code necessarily, although we love code. I mean, software is the mother tongue of all of this. But if we don't build into our governance and our outlook and our value system the expectation that we see this world that you're describing around us, I think we'll know we're headed in the wrong direction.
Yes, and let's all be very clear about it. This journey and this work, the work of the network, it's not always an easy thing. For example, we have been involved with Leuven University and with Photo Consortium in a number of projects, very close to what Julia describes, where we reached out to sometimes very small, but also sometimes very minoritized, so not only minor, but minoritized communities. And it became clear to us quickly that it takes some capacity building and some rapprochement from both sides. So it's an openness that needs to be installed, if not yet present. And that's kind of the condition for taking a look at each other, what we have to offer, and what we can bring to the table. For instance, we have been working with the Maronite community in Cyprus. My colleague Marinos Ioannidis has joined us today. He gave us an incredible experience when he brought us in touch with a very small community who took very good care of their heritage with a small private archive, but wanted to really share it with the world, share the stories behind it, now that there are still people to tell the stories and to show what it really was like. And these, to me, even though such projects are capsule projects, they last for a year, for 18 months, take a lot of investment of time and effort and people and sometimes patience. But what comes out of it is truly, that's a milestone. That's not only a signpost, that's a milestone.
As the mic goes to Rehana for her response, oh, she's already got one. I think the dream, now digital has a bit of a history to it. When you and your colleagues started in the 2000s and the aughts, we didn't know as much. There wasn't as much to look backward on. But we saw these dream projects emerge, and I think something we hope for and something that Rehana has spoken a bit about in our preparation is bringing this to scale, Rehana?
Yeah, so what I would like to is to zoom out, just for a minute and go back really to the premises, which was the European construction, Where are we starting from? I think we should always remember that. The overarching idea is that how do you overcome division by pulling together what was most precious at that time, which were the resources, precious resources such as steel and coal. Why would you share that with someone who might have been before your enemy, And the whole idea was around sharing and putting together resources, creating a shared vision and common principles. So we've come a long way from the European community to a European Union, where actually we are really building together this union. It's not just a community. We are putting in together. We are sharing stuff, and we are co-owning resources, ideas, values together. So I think we have to keep that in mind when you speak about this particular initiative, Europeana, which reflects that construction. And I'm quite proud that we've really, the European community has evolved from being a community of a handful of people and of institutions to an ecosystem. Because today, when you look at Europeana, you have a lot of communities in there. You have obviously cultural heritage institutions, but they are very varied, You cannot speak of one institution as if it were similar to another. You have a variety of sizes, of ways of operating, of challenges. So you have the cultural heritage institutions. You have those who are in European and those who are not there yet that we need to go and bring in. And that, Michael, I agree with you, it is a signpost. And we're always at the back of Harry and his team, to say, give us the data, how many new people are entering, we need to have new entrants, we need to have that fresh new blood. And if you remember in his slide, we had one of the recommendations that the Commission made was to digitize all monuments and sites which are at risk. Risk is left to the appreciation of the member state. We don't have that community in Europeana. We need to bring that in the data space. So many communities that we're speaking, the institutions, the network, the aggregators, who are very important data intermediaries, the foundation, the Commission, the member states, we come in all together. Community of people, but we are also speaking about community of resources. We're speaking about a community of data. because this is also at the heart of the data space. How do we bring that together so that you can access my data and together we can create something out of it? So the whole concept of community is evolving, I think, with the data space, is about how do we open the notion of community and networks.
Oh, lovely. And Rehana, your comment about the origin of the European Union in the things that were precious to us at the time, steel and coal, and now where we are, that's very moving. Yeah. That's a very moving metaphor for us. Sofie, you looked like you wanted to add to that.
Yes, I was very much struck by this idea of the ecosystem, because that's one of the most beautiful things I find in the Europeana verse, that we are a cage with so many different birds, if you want, very colorful, small, big ones, predatory birds and little colibris, but we live in a kind of symbiosis, right? And we learn from one another, we pick up little things here and there, and we grow exponentially from just being part of the ecosystem. So for me, that's also a very rewarding way to think of our communities and our networks.
Oh, go ahead, Rehana.
No, I just want to add one aspect which we've been mentioning, which is also fundamental. It's capacity building. You know, it's we need also to empower. Empower is a very, we use that word a lot, but here it takes a lot of, its full sense is that how does the community have the skills, the knowledge, the tools, but also the network and the ability to do it together. So that's an important part as well of the community aspect.
I think when we hear these conversations, you hear a lot of the how do we questions. And what I think we would expect as we get on board, I'm gonna bury this ship metaphor. I'm gonna work this until there's nothing left. But you get on this ship together with how do we raise the sails? How do we do these things? And those questions over time, if you're fortunate enough to work on a project over time, you start to see clarity. You start to learn that you can do those things. The risk is that you become so comfortable in the habits of sailing the ship a certain way that you forget there are other places to go. And when you get involved in a funded project with code, there's with a spectacular sponsor, there's a tendency to stick to the course, as we've discussed. And I'm interested in this idea of what the difference is between kind of just managing a software system or a community or an ecosystem. Like, what the heck? Can I say hell? What the heck? What the heck does it mean to manage an ecosystem? Esther, I'm looking to you. It's not a question that can be answered easily in 2 minutes, but with your experience in OpenGov and with system software and complex architectures, how do people start to think and sail a ship whose goal is to build strong ecosystems?
Mm-hmm. First, I would like to acknowledge how, in the beginning, you asked us, how do we see signposts that we are not on the right track? And we already silently moved to, no, being on the right track might be already the first mistake we can do.
Yeah.
So I guess the autopilot function that these nice yards have, right? That's the worst mistake that we can do, because we learned the question is even changing. The priorities are changing, the questions are changing, and a data space as an answer is a moving target, is an answer that can adapt to changing questions, as long as we don't switch to autopilot. I think that's just what I saw here happening, which I wanted to point out. And then indeed, how to manage an ecosystem. Can we have a separate session on that one?
But like, give us in 50 seconds, like, if you're on board a ship and the people are caring about ecosystems, what kinds of things do you expect to see happening, as opposed to one that doesn't care about ecosystems at all?
So indeed, the theme I'm working on is called collaborative data ecosystems. So
I didn't even know that when I asked you that question.
Don't ask me. The first thing I like to say is let's all turn on the spot ourselves and realize we are already part of data ecosystems. We are with our health insurance, and we are as citizens, and we are with citizens with a cultural interest. So for an ecosystem, to manage an ecosystem is to raise the awareness in individuals and organizations that we are already part of it. And with that awareness, we can start looking each other in the eye and start managing the ecosystem, which should be as federated as its data. So I wouldn't, in my view, wouldn't invite to, again, create a centralized power that says, here's my stakeholder map, and now I'm going to set up a process chart. But let's start with the awareness of the parties in the ecosystem to get the self-awareness of us being a data ecosystem.
That's an awesome answer. Thank you. Again, we're not doing justice to any of these questions in 15 minutes, regardless of how brilliant our panelists are and you are. But this is a signal of the kinds of discussions we want to be hearing. And I'm already learning a ton, so thank you. Let's go to the next video. Caitlin Southwick, who's here in the audience. You can keep us honest, Caitlin.
During COVID, we were all thrust into a digital world unlike one we had ever experienced. And while the skies cleared and the animals returned, we started to realize that the impact we have on the planet is not only from our physical presence, but also from our digital presence. We started talking about the carbon footprint of Zoom calls and the energy consumption from digitizing collections. We realized that the cloud is not just a make-believe place in the sky, but a physical data center, currently producing more carbon than the aviation industry, and estimated to consume 20% of the world's energy by 2025. We know that we need to reduce our carbon emissions and lower our energy consumption, not in the future, but now. And while the digital brings the world together, we must also take into account the environmental and social impacts of this space. I am here because while I am intrigued with what this new Europeana data space is going to be, I'm also concerned about its impact. What is the carbon footprint of this space? How do we ensure that it's equitable and accessible and not exclusive? How much money is being spent on this? The number one reason I hear for cultural institutions not addressing their own carbon footprint is because of budget constraints. Maybe this money would have been better spent helping cultural institutions address their own carbon footprint. I'm also a little concerned about the timing here. In the wake of so many unprecedented disasters facing our planet and our species, why is this relevant? And why is it relevant right now?
We asked for provocation and we got provocation. And Martina.
Well, well, thank you, Caitlin. It's a very important question and one we should not forget. I think that as all industries, the cultural heritage industries is responsible for emission. And I think that we need to remember, not because we need to stop doing what we do, but because we need to concentrate on making it valuable. In other words, to contrast impact with impact. That is, contrast impact on the climate with impact for the climate. And what I mean by that is to say that I think that cultural heritage institutions have a great power to sway the ideas of people, to make them aware that there is a climate emergency, and therefore we all need to change our way of life, our attitudes towards certain things, to our preconceived notions of what we need to do. And the museums and galleries and libraries have great opportunity to do just that. For example, in my country, there is a lot of resistance to installing alternative energies plants like eolic windmills or solar panels, because a lot of people think they destroy the landscape that we are so proud of. And so, you know, I think that museums and libraries and digital collection have a real power to mediate that difficulty so that we can be made aware of how important it is and how our landscape is part of man activity, and therefore, as the Anthropocene seen progress, we also need to progress in our thinking. So in other words, we need to make it count, and we need to make every emission that we use for the digital, our digital data space, to be important, to make sure that everybody understands what we need to do to confront the climate crisis.
Beautifully said. And I'm remembering our conversation as a panel when we were struggling with this issue. This is going to have a carbon cost. It's going to have an opportunity cost. And you said so firmly, it has to count. What we do has to count.
And we need to count, because
we need to count.
And the other part of your question was we need to know how much we are emitting, and I think that maybe Harry has some ideas.
Yeah, the mic goes to you now, Harry.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, I think we agree. I think that's it. So let me just, I've been thinking a bit about, numbers and the counting. So first of all, how big is the carbon footprint of digital in our industry? I think that's one of the key things we need to understand. And I won't pretend I have the answer, but I want to share a few things with you. So the carbon footprint of the Europeana Foundation in 2020, we've calculated. There's a report that you can download on the website, and that is, if I'm not mistaken, 87 tons of CO2 emission in 2020. How much is 87 tons? It's the equivalent. Thank you, Patrick. It's the equivalent of the emission of 11 homes in the Western world. Is that much or is that not much? I think that those are the kinds of things that we need to ask ourselves. Is that a lot? Is that not a lot? I think what the past couple of years have done for me is to be much more deeply realizing that everything we do has a carbon footprint, including digital, like you said. I think 10 years ago I thought digital's sort of out there. Now we know there are server farms and parks occupying half the desert and sucking up energy. In fact, it's a nice little detail. While you sit here doing nothing, every second you produce 1.7 megabytes of data via your phones. You just sit here and that's happening. And so I think we should also look at how much is the carbon footprint of digital cultural heritage in the context of everything else, right? So everything else, Monsieur Breton has learned this. We, at the moment, I think this was a year old, we have collectively over the world 44 zettabytes of data. Zettabyte, I've learned, is a 1 with 21 zeros. Now you know that too. I don't know the numbers. Of how much we've digitized, how much, and it's not just the parking it on the server. It's how often that server is interrogated, right? The streaming is what takes up most energy. My guess would be, in the bigger scheme of things, if sort of the screen in the background here is all the energy consumption that is taken via digital, which is indeed increasing dramatically as a component of all the energy, we wouldn't be more than a pixel, is my guess at the moment. I think we shouldn't overestimate how much we've actually digitized and how much that is being used. So maybe what I'm trying to say is, when we need to make things count, and I think digital sobriety is something that we need to understand. We can't just do as we used to, is just let's put everything under the scanner, right? And then see what happens. I think we need to be much more cautious with that and deliberate in what we want to do with that data. But I don't think digital component, the cost side of things, but we'll hear more from you, Caitlin, later on Friday, right?
That's right. Caitlin's giving a closing keynote.
Closing keynote, and we're super interested in that. But my guess would be that we still have some leeway, that we can still do a little bit more in digitization, as long as we can make things count. And I think here we need to be looking for, Pierluigi Sacco, you've worked with a lot. I think many people will know him. He's done a lot of work in the relationship between cultural participation in particular, what he calls regime 3.0, and behavioral change. And I think if we want to know what counts, we need to understand exactly that, right? How do we make behavioral change in relation to climate via culture work? I don't know. So those were just some more reflection on what you said, Martina.
Yeah, in fact, in an article that he wrote, he showed that people, the people that have more awareness of cultural heritage, that went to museum, read, went to cinemas, theater, etc., were the group of people that were more likely to recycle. So there's a correlation between recycling and, being aware of culture, or taking advantage of the cultural offer out there. So I think that what we do can be used towards the goal of contrasting climate change, or mitigating or adapting to climate change, because that's all we need to do. Climate change is already out there. We need to adapt and mitigate, and that takes a huge effort on the part of everyone. It's not something that can just be imposed top-down, and can especially needs an awareness in those countries where the politics is less aware of climate change. And so I think that the cultural heritage is extremely important in broadcasting that message.
But I think the tricky bit will be what the Commission, I think, calls the triple transition, right? Social, digital, and climate neutral. These sometimes seem to be in opposition to each other, and how do we make those work together towards the same goal? That's going to be the multi-million-dollar question.
Yeah, as I've been listening to this conversation, and as we were preparing and thinking about Caitlin's video, I think a couple of thoughts. One is I keep coming back to Greta Thunberg's writing. I've recently read a book, the Penguin Green Ideas series, is a wonderful series of 25 books, small novellas about climate action, climate change. And the first one is by Greta Thunberg. It's a collection of her speeches, and she makes the case very, very, very persuasively that step one in the problem in society now is that there is nowhere near the level of awareness of the climate crisis to drive the necessary pro-social, political, business change, period. And that really woke up my ears, because that awareness raising is something that our sector prides itself on. It's smack dab in the middle of our value proposition in society. And yet, if I may, I think we're spectacularly unengaged in that effort now. Like, spectacularly indifferent to it now. I hope that changes quickly. And in playing through our comments, Caitlin, your comments focus on carbon footprint. I think that's a destination we're comfortable sailing our ship toward. Let's raise awareness, let's keep the carbon footprint low. But I wonder about that other course we could set sail on, more attuned to what you were describing, Martina, of really working as part of society to build the will to act. It's scary, it's hard, it's not easy, as you were saying, Sofie. Sofie, is that something that we ought to try 10 years from now when we look back at the genesis and operation of the data space? Should we have a story there about how we reached across our love of data and our love of museums and tradition to take the risk to involve our neighbors in this new struggle?
Well, I think that in any case, an important area of impact in the sector that we work in is, of course, the societal impact. And what we can strive for as a Europeana initiative is at least to feed the identities of the communities, the partners, the networks that we work with, and to strengthen the cohesion not only within those networks, but also across. I think identity breeds reflection, breeds awareness. So this is where we really have a role to play. This is something that we're already doing and that we're thinking about more and more now that a lot of funding applications ask the applicant to go to the very bottom of what will your impact be. Of course, this doesn't relieve us of a responsibility to also think about our environmental impact. And here I completely agree with Harry that it's kind of problematic that we don't have a clue when it comes to quantities and numbers and relative percentages. How are we doing on a scale of society as large? So I think there we have some very urgent, as you say, Mike, very urgent and very important homework to do, in which we are perhaps not very well versed. So I'm now asking myself, is this perhaps something where we could look at how other data spaces are doing? How are they dealing with this provocation? And can we perhaps leverage on part of the road that they already traveled?
Marie, I've learned through our work together on the advisory board that you often sit very quietly, and then when we ask you to weigh in, you have, not to put the pressure on, but you always have something very thoughtful to say. I'd love to have you at the microphone now to get your thoughts on this conversation.
Actually, I'm going to get, again, very basic, but this question of the impact, the climate impact, the impact on the climate of the data space, I think it's pretty relevant right now because we are in a kind of race towards technology. We are speaking of NFT, metaverse, all these blockchain technologies. We all know that for the time being, it's very resource consuming and it has a very serious impact. So it might sound very sexy. Everyone wants to be on the metaverse. We even speak about Europeana-verse now. But we need to make sure that we are in the process of building the data space. We need to make sure that we go to the right technologies. There are some technologies that might be less, have a less impact than some others. I'm so pleased that Lily opened with the linked data. As a linked data ambassador, I'm pretty much sure that these kind of technologies can just help to reduce the impact and still have the purpose to share values, to share culture, to democratize culture. So I really think that we can do both, build a data space and still be responsible and respect the principle of digital sobriety.
Lovely. And Caitlin, when you speak on Friday, give us a sense of what you heard here, what the mileposts you expect to see. I think this is a moment when we can open up these questions to the online audience. Shadi has helped me pull together some of the questions we've had, and then we've got an awesome Dutch padded microphone ball that we can distribute out into the audience in a minute. So let me start with an online question or two, and we have about 10-15 minutes for this block. Anonymous attendee. The issue says, the issues raised in this provocation video are really interesting. How might one attempt to make these kinds of course corrections once funding has been secured? Is it possible to normalize this introspection about the destination of the ship we build? I wonder if anyone has a story about a time they've been on a big project that's had to change course partway through. Yes, Esther, please.
Is there any big project ever not running into any unexpected circumstances or muddy waters? Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Not for you, always goes well. One thing came to mind, which I think is also relevant as we have already spoken about impact and making it count. Big project I've been on, which is also very familiar, of course, to you and to many of us here, is open data in Europe. We've been co-leading the European data portal. And here we started with this idea of making as much data publicly available as possible. I think an idea we were familiar with, and it sounds really good. And then we set up KPIs, because we wanted to make sure we're on the right course. And then we set up a KPI, for example, like number of data sets. Sounds quite convincing, but if you look a little bit deeper in it, the more advanced let's say, a data portal is, the less data sets it has, because it's unified. So if the number of data sets goes up, it's not necessarily a success factor. So we needed to challenge our KPIs, which is challenging our whole idea of how we measure and define success, and had to think about what is it actually that tells us that we're successful with open data. So we had to think about reuse, how is impact created, how can we measure that? So we need to have some kind of bottom-up idea. So we came up with methodologies of how many lives are saved, how much emission is reduced by reusing open data. And that was, for my feeling, a dramatic mind shift. And if we would not have done that, we would have definitely sailed the wrong way, going for as many data sets as possible.
That's a great example. Thank you. Another question, online attendee Alexandra Galindo. I would like to ask about your position on international databases. I live in Germany, and here every single library, university, and museum is using their own database to digitize their collection, always limited by manpower and budget constraints. There is no coordination between institutions at a national level, let alone at a European one. How can we help solve this issue? Harry? How do we help solve that issue?
Well,
or Marie from the aggregators.
I think Marie can talk later. My initial reaction is that's strange. I think in Germany you're so incredibly well organized. You've got not just generally. I think the German aggregator, the Deutsche Digitale Bibliothek, is one of the highlights of our aggregators ecosystem. So Marie, do you want to share some thoughts?
I would like to say, it comes back to the silos that I was mentioning earlier, It's like, this is my boat. I want to ride my boat. This is basically the thing. And usually we have the same kind of situation in France, actually. But then it's interesting because then we can use Europeana. I do so. I use Europeana to harmonize and coordinate a bit better things. And I think it's when you can showcase everything at the same place, it can help actually to make people collaborate. And I think this is why I think the data space, in a way, it's kind of great opportunity because then you convince people that they are going to be part of it. So they can really collaborate and they can really have the control on what they will do. And this is, I think, the solution in a way to first initiate this collaboration and coordination, because if you are not ready to collaborate, so it's complicated then to get some coordination.
Yeah, I think too. Oh, sorry, Rehana, please.
There is also a need in countries to really get the act together. In the policy document, the recommendation, we really recommend member states to come up with comprehensive national digital strategies. So it's not about strategies that are only going to look at a particular point of view, like just digitization, but really look at all the elements, all the dimensions that you need, to build those data spaces. Digitization being only one of them, the way to do it, the capacity building. So all these factors are there. And I have to say that you have some member states who are doing it very well. You have very ambitious strategies. You have processes in place, how to support institutions. So we do have best practices that we can disseminate through the Europeana initiative.
May I ask, how important is the joyousness and beauty and effortlessness of the end user experience in all of this? So we can throw sticks at curators and registrars and scientists and tell them to use our systems. We know that doesn't really create a better world. Can we lure them into participation by giving them a tremendous end-user experience? Not to ask a leading question or anything like that,
but I'm going to ask Harry and Hannah the number of times we've had the discussions about user experience, and you saw the website. Huh? I mean, it's a lot about improving user experience. My colleague Fulgencio is here. It's one of the crucial points that Hannah and her team are working on. How do we make sure that we are on par, you know, of what's happening on other websites. Of course, we don't have the same resources, but still we need to have the user experience at the heart of the engagement.
We love to hear that from our friends at the Commission.
We're not bad people.
No, of course not. But
yes, I wanted to say the user experience is a substantial part of the value proposition. So to answer the question, what can we do? I think it's to roll out a carpet as Europeana and say, hey, come and take a look at what we have. And to that end, we should really refine and set straight our value proposition. And we are working very hard on that. I think we did that also in the whole preparatory process, coming closer and closer to the data space. Now that we're almost in it, or with one foot in it, I think we have to be stringent. We have to walk that last mile and really make clear what we stand for, what the data space offers in terms of opportunities, and then hope that it does not only have a push, but also a pull effect.
a happy crew. A happy
A happy
pirate
crew on board, yes.
Let's go to the audience for a couple of questions, and then I have a nice question to end on from online. Sarah has the Dutch blue microphone ball, and I'll leave it to you to... You have to be gentle. You have to be a little gentle with the ball. So please, your name and...
Yeah. 1, 2. Okay, yeah, this works. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, my name is Sebastian Majstorovic. I'm co-founder of a grassroots initiative called Sucho, which is saving Ukrainian cultural heritage online. And first of all, I wanted to thank you all for your contributions. I think they were really inspiring also to me. And I would like to follow up on something that I think was touched upon. One is empowerment, and the other one is the platform aspect, right? So listening to Julia's provocative video, I was wondering whether it should be the ambition of Europeana as in the new form as the data space to, deplatform the commercial platforms on one hand, but also build, tools and services that can be used by people who we usually maybe not involved, so people that are outside of our institutional frameworks. To just make it very explicit, when we are 1,500 volunteers, when we tried to collaborate, we could not help but to resort to commercial tools because it's really hard to work with a lot of data in the cloud. So when we're thinking about Europeana as a data space, will the tools that will be developed there only be available to the stakeholders, to the frameworks that we're used to, or should it be an ambition that if we want unexpected results, unexpected new kinds of collections, exhibitions, and curations, to really take the leap and make it available to people who we cannot know yet that they might want to collaborate with the data that's in it. So is that something that you think can be done? Thank you.
Thank you.
I was hoping to have that thing to catch, but great question. Thank you. I think when we started thinking about the data space in the changing role of what we're doing now as a digital service infrastructure to become something in the data space, I think even the language we use for it is different, isn't it? So instead of being, I don't know, I always think of a machine, sort of, an operator of a machine that does stuff, brings data from one place to another. I think the really interesting thing about being in a data space, and we've been talking about this, Mike, as maybe Europeana could be the steward, right? The steward is maybe a more appropriate word to think of the role that we have in this new environment. Now, what is that what makes that different is that the stuff it's not only about the stuff we build as part of the contract with the Commission, and no, they're not bad people. Yeah,
That's why we wanted Rehana here.
It's not only about making that available, and of course that will be available in open source wherever it can with good documentation and so forth. But I think it is inviting also other organizations like your own, which we've been, parts of our network have been involved in, we've talked, inviting you into the data space, make you feel welcome to be part and share your things with our other organizations. I think I've been thinking a lot about the word interoperability in the past couple of days, and I realized that in the old days, we thought about interoperability very much in a technical sense, right? So our metadata needs to be able to communicate with your metadata. When they can talk, you can exchange things. But I think even more so than before, we need to think about interoperability in a much wider sense, right? It needs to be the interoperability of value systems. You know, if your organization shares the same value system as our data space, you're welcome. You should join, and we should make these things available for everyone. So I think that's the way to think about it. So the short answer to your question, I think, is yes, we'll make everything available to everyone as possible, where possible, and invite others to participate in it as well. Rehana, do you agree?
We agree, but no, first of all, I'm so glad you asked these questions, because precisely this is our ambition, that within the data space, you have tools that have been, for instance, piloted, experimented within the central services, which can then be deployed, within the data space for a wider use. And we had this discussion last week. So, for instance, we do have tools. An example, AI for image enhancement that has been tested within Europeana and the partners. So how can we make that available for other cultural heritage institutions to make use of that? So the whole idea of the data space is that within the technologies that we will be using, we're not developing, we're making use of mature technologies, how can we also make tools available for cultural heritage institutions, also for creators to develop new content and new services. It's really in the spirit of the data space.
Okay. Let's take another question from the house. Big blue ball is floating around. Well done. Please introduce yourself. Fire away.
I'm Seamus Ross. So I have one comment, one suggestion, and one question. The first comment was, found it very interesting to hear open data brought up in the context of the data spaces. And I think that's great, because it would be really good to look at the failings in open data. For example, the lack of persistent identifiers for open data sets, the lack of tools in most countries, including on the European portal, for educating users about how to use material, although the European portal is better than others I could mention. The fact that there are no preservation policies in most countries for open data, and the fact that when an open data set changes, you only generally have the most up-to-date one, not the historic one, so you can't study change over time. So those are things we might want to think about, and there are many others that you could pull out if you did an analysis of open data that might help with the portal. A suggestion. There was a point made that most of us don't know what the cost of a search is. I taught a whole course on this a couple of years ago, and one of the interesting things is people don't think when they do a Google search what it costs. Europeana might actually put a little signpost on the website after I do a search, and then I've done 7 searches because I didn't actually think about the query properly, to tell me what the cost of that was, not just at the server end, but at the transaction end to the user. And the question, you talked about climate a lot in the context of open data. Could some of the panelists comment about how about open data spaces, Could some of the panel please comment upon how these open data spaces are really going to help social justice?
So that connects to the question from our online commentator, Ana Luisa Bolsa asked, how can we guarantee the defense of democracy and human rights as a result of all of this?
Anyone else? No. Okay.
And this is one of those moments when you're in the conference room, you've been there all day, you're sweaty, your butt hurts. Somebody says something like that, and you got to deal with it. And you don't have all the answers. But this is what the body language is like when you start to lean into it.
Well, it's also our reality, isn't it? In every project that we work, whether the data space was there or whether it's coming and whatever it will be like, this is a challenge that we face in whatever cultural heritage context, that whenever you work with certain collections, whenever you work with bigger institutions or public institutions, there's always other collections, smaller communities, smaller players that somehow stay at the edge of the effort. I think what we want to do with the data space is kind of scale up and pool our resources and increase our capacity to work with specific and with smaller institutions and collections. I think this indeed can give a voice to stories that are hitherto unexpressed. And we heard this morning that sharing these stories, I believe it was Lily, who stressed that sharing the stories is one of our main responsibilities. And I think that it is a true actor for change. So maybe, I don't know, is it a small drop in a very big sea? I don't know, but I am sure that it's not a reason to pull back. So I think we are on a good track here, doing what we do, but multiplying it by data space dimensions.
Yeah. A question I will ask, but which we won't be able to. I'm sorry, Marie. Please, quickly.
I just wanted to say that as a cultural heritage professional and someone working on the ministry, our job is to make everyone welcome in a cultural institution, in the premises of an institution. And basically, it's just bringing this in the digital space. The data space should be welcoming everyone, and no one should feel rejected. And this is what we are working on. And I was tending the mic to Sofie so she can mention maybe one of the projects that it's going to start about the bias and then the inclusivity, because I think it's basically what we need to focus on also. We need to take this into account when we are in the physical space, so for sure we will have to take care of this also in the digital space.
Yes, to very, very shortly.
One breath.
One breath, but I wanted to say two things.
One.
But I will do it in one breath. So yes, what we are doing are specific projects targeting at kind of trying to right the wrongs that have been done from a historical point of view. So we are working on metadata. We are working on algorithms, making them more intelligent from an inclusive and a societal point of view. But what we also want to do is to apply new strategies that are really bottom-up, really grassroots from the communities themselves. So if you ask the question, what are you going to do? I would say we're also very much going to listen, to ask and to listen, and to start digitization initiatives from the very communities themselves.
Yeah, I think thank you. There are a lot of great questions. If you get a question in through Zoom, I promise you I will try and chase down a response for you over the course of the conference. Or if you want to find me personally, or we'll find a way to get your input. This is a thing we're doing together. And I think on the advisory board that I serve on, we think about helping the movement understand where the line of accountability should be for these social outcomes. And that is a conversation in progress. It's a hard one. We need your thoughts and pressure, and also your sweat. So, with that note, last video provocation, looking at the future. We'll have a quick response from Sofie and Harry, compressed, and then we'll do a tour de table, and then coffee and lunch is waiting for you. I will say too, with Lauren Vargas, I'm leading a Lego serious play workshop from 1:15 it's a 3.5-hour workshop, to go very deep into a few of these issues. What is blocking or enabling the cultural sector's progress towards these important societal goals. So there are 30 seats total. I don't know how many are taken now, but if you haven't registered, please, you can try to do it online now, or come up to the conference room afterwards. It'll be a very intense and good session. Recommend it. A lot of your friends will be there. Okay.
Hello everyone. One way to make sure the data space will be genuinely used and appreciated in the future is to make sure it reflects the needs and priorities of young people today. At ESTAC, we have good experience of actively involving young people. Our network, which is entirely youth-led by a team of volunteers from all around Europe, was born because there was little opportunity for young people to be in charge of their own programs anywhere else. We felt that the activities proposed for youth by established heritage organizations were not necessarily feeling our need to take charge and act on our passion. In other words, we were included as passive actors, as participants, but not as active deciders. 5 years later, we have organized dozens of webinars, 4 conferences, created an online magazine, and published 3 books, amongst many other things. At ESTAC, we know that experience does not equal capacity or drive, and that truly involving young people in decisions from the get-go can be revolutionary and empowering. For example, I've never seen the cloud where I'm storing personal photos, contacts, apps, and other everyday stuff. Nevertheless, I trust it, and I already can't imagine myself without it. I feel on cloud 9 when backed by technology. So I'm aware there is no other way forward and that the younger generation feels the same as me. Heritage was and still is analog in many ways, which is perfectly okay. But for education, research, promotion, awareness and inclusivity, accessibility, transition to greener ways of living, to name just a few, a new data space for culture and European cultural cloud would be greatly beneficial.
We want to ask the panel today, will this be an ever-growing space? Will it allow updates? What features might we think of to address authenticity in the data space? What stakeholders would be appropriate to provide content? Might this entail a cultural revitalization? How will Europeana foster growth based on democratic participation and inclusion? Will young people be allowed to be a part of the process in a meaningful way and shape the outcomes? Will the platform be widely accessible and free of charge? We want to be involved in decision-making and digital transformation. At the end of the day, it's our future too. Will Europeana be ready to hold our hand as partners so that we can work together to make the data space successful in the future years? These are just a few of our ideas to start with. We would be happy to contribute along the way. Thank you.
And that was Carlota Rodríguez starting out and Sorina Neascu ending up, and they're the co-heads of ESAC, the European Students Association for Cultural Heritage. And when I told you what was going to happen next, I sold out the best thing about the morning, which is data poet Mr. G will close out this session. You ready, G? Okay, he's getting there. He's making notes. So, Harry, there's some pretty direct questions in there. I want to get off the table first, and we'll go to then we'll go to Sofie. Harry, will the platform be widely accessible and free of charge?
Yes.
Will this be an ever-growing space?
More difficult to answer. I would say yes, but not only with data, but mostly with people and data. Generally, answer is yes.
Okay,
Growing.
that's the spirit of it. That's where we're headed. Yeah. Will it allow updates?
Absolutely.
Will young people be allowed to be part of the process in a meaningful way and shape the outcomes?
Oh yeah, and you've seen the data already. More young people are joining us, and if you're not, join the network association immediately and participate, right?
Yes, I was thinking of that when you showed that number earlier this morning. I was thinking that there's probably a lot of untapped potential here with a very, very young audience. So also with the network association, I think this is something we should reflect upon, and we should see how we can cater really well for these youngsters, but also what they can bring to us as a group. Now, that being said, what I didn't appreciate very much, or appreciate is not the right word, but what struck me was that there seems to be a kind of dichotomy between what are you guys going to do with the data space and could we be in there? I say, hearing that somebody is happy to get involved is really a wish come true. So I think we definitely need to hear these young people. We want a data space that is continuously morphing. I think the best thing we can do to blow it up is to try to make it something very rigid with very strict limitations. this is not how the world today functions at all, or how our everyday life even functions. So I would say let's open up the gates for these digitally born generations. And again, as I said, listen to what they are saying. So the answer to the question is, yes, you can be involved, you should be involved, and please don't hesitate to actively step into the game.
Harry?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just thinking of something that my son keeps telling me. I used to go to a specific bar in The Hague, and I considered it to be my bar. There were people of my age. We were listening to bands we liked. And then pandemic happened, and then I went to my bar again, and it was completely filled with young people, which was interesting. There was no band playing anymore. They took out the band, and they looked at me like, what are you doing here? Would that be a cool thing to happen to our data space?
I think yes, because probably you were looking at those young people and checking out their fashion and listening to their music, and this is how we keep refreshing ourselves as well, no?
Indeed. But I think, body language, you keep saying that word, what is the body language that this data space shows? And is that an interesting one for young people, old people, whatever there is in the mix, to join in? And I don't like the words, open the gates, because I don't think we've ever had gates. Formal gates to you're in and you're out.
No, but I will say the example of ESOC is that they did not feel welcome or included among the cultural convenings of Europe. So they made their own frickin' organization, which is the most badass thing you could do.
Yeah, and now let's bring them into the ecosystem, as we say.
So I would challenge you to disagree with me. This belongs to them. This belongs to everybody. It's not a question of us including them. It's a question of us recognizing that fact. Does anyone disagree with that?
Yes, because the fact that there is no ownership yet, I see it as problematic. So this is something for us to really work very hard on.
Outstanding. Okay.
But Martina said...
Yes, Martina?
The reverse.
Well, I think it's, it belongs, they should occupy it.
Like Occupy Wall Street?
Well,
Occupy?
if they feel they're not included, they should occupy it. And as Sofie said, we would welcome that. It's not about us and them, because as Harry said, we strive it's all about open access, all about to make it accessible in cognitive ways as well as technological ways, so that if you feel that you're not represented, that you should not only tell us as they're doing, but also occupy us, come and get us.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's start the tour de table with you then, if you would like. I'm going to set, as people who've been in workshops with me, the 1-minute timer. And we're going to go zoom, 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 and then Mr. G. All right?
Well, today I think we've reflected upon a great many questions that are ever present in whatever we do as leader of cultural institution or granting agencies. And I think that we need to be mindful constantly that there are no set answers to these big questions, that the questions are out there and the answers are out there, and we need to figure it out together. So we need to be listening to each other constantly. Most important, we need to be aware that what we do is important. It's not just a frivolous and a touch out there, that we need to make it count, because by making it count, we can shape the world we'll be living in, because the data spaces are already part of our society.
Lovely. Marie?
I would like to say that for me, for the data space to be a success, it will have to be a part of the natural processes of everyone, in a way. As a user, as someone who produces data, who share it or reuse it. If it's not something that comes naturally, it will always be like a big effort to do to be there, to collaborate with the other colleagues in the same country or at European level. And I think one of the thing we also touched upon is that it will have an impact, social, on the climate, on everything. We expect it to have an impact in a way, at least socially and culturally. But also we need to be aware of what we want to show, to promote, because it's also about the values. We spoke a lot about democratization of culture, and I think this is what should be the thing that lead the sale. I exploded the time, sorry. And actually, my last wish is that we go full on interoperability, on linked data, and linking people as well, because this is a network, and we should be all part of it.
Lovely. Yeah.
Mike, you said I could use my minute for anything that I wanted to say.
Yeah.
So I wanted to make a plea for vulnerability, for us to, as cultural heritage professionals. We've been talking about the data space a lot from a very business-oriented point of view. We've been talking about numbers, about KPIs, about frameworks, and so on. I think also what makes our jobs, our profession, our mission so beautiful is that we're in it also, I think most of you, with our hearts as well. We're talking about culture, we're talking about stories, we're hoping to touch people with these stories. I think we should also allow ourselves sometimes to be vulnerable. Not every project will work, we will miss some signposts, and that's perfectly okay. We just need to be brave and to carry on.
Lovely, thank you. Esther?
Thank you. Yes, my ideas follow your motive exactly. Europeana is becoming a data space, which is not a given. It could have stayed being the DSI Europeana, and we had 13 data spaces. But cultural heritage in a data space is just at least as important as mobility, agriculture, and the other data spaces. It is a little bit an odd one, I believe. I find it so intriguing. Let's say agriculture, for example, has maybe a more clearer path, clearer KPIs, a clearer target picture. And the cultural heritage data space is so intriguing because maybe more than the others, we need to ask ourselves constantly what is important, because the target picture is moving, as we said, the questions are moving. And the answer is allowing for that. So in your spirit, by making Europeana become a data space, maybe like me, some of you out there are here just because of that and wouldn't be here if it weren't like this. So bringing more people together.
Lovely.
And I'm going to build on what Esther just said. I had not prepared this. I was waiting for the general discussion. We don't have an answer for everything. And we're not pretending that we have an answer on everything. However, we know what we have achieved together in 15 years. So we're going to build on that. And in other data spaces, for instance, I have the data space for skills, for media, for tourism. We are calling for blueprints, to help us understand how we're going to set the path. So a lot of work has been done in Europeana, and I think we should certainly not underestimate what has been done, even if it's the odd one out.
Yeah, wonderful. We've said so many things. Just blurt out what's on my mind. We need a new narrative as a society. I think the data space can only be a success if the data space deals with things that you also deal with in your own personal lives, right? So I've been reading this book by Jeremy Lent that I would recommend everyone to read. It's called The Web of Meaning. There are several writers at the moment who try to construct a new narrative. We know we're at the end of a current narrative of liberalism and capitalism and so forth, but we don't have a new one. So my hope is that together, and this is also what this book propagates, is that the future is in collaboration. That's what made success as not the selfish gene that is at the heart of capitalism, but collaboration is going to bring us into the new narrative and the new story. So that's my hope.
Thank you, panel. Thank you, question askers. Thank you, respondents, provocateurs, everyone for a fantastic session. And my time is up too.